Hey, BattleTech buddies. I'm back after a bit of a hiatus. I've been having too much fun in the sun this summer to kind of keep up on my video schedule, but finally taking a break for the game and really excited to be back with you guys. And we got a cool topic today that I've been meaning to talk about for a while, which is city lance construction, or just more broadly, what kind of forces do you want to take into a city battle in BattleTech? Now, city battles raise a lot of complications. The rules are pretty complex. I'm going to be assuming in this video that you're playing with all of the basic city rules, including all the stuff about infantry going inside buildings, buildings falling down, all those kinds of things. So the number one thing, the first thing we want to think about whenever we're putting together any force in BattleTech is the initiative order. We want to pick some units that we think are going to be good candidates to go early in the initiative order, or what we might call them initiative sinks. Now, classically in BattleTech, the best units to go first in the initiative order are your long-range sniper units. But the problem with that in the city setting is that long-range snipers are really weak in the city, especially given their battle value. The sad fact of the matter is that the buildings get in the way too much, and if you have something that is firing Gauss rifles or extended range PPCs down on your opponents, it's just not going to be able to take advantage of the long ranges of those weapons. So those weapons are really not especially valuable in the city. The one type of long-range weapon that does function well in the city is long-range missiles, if you have spotters for them to use indirect fire. So one type of unit that you can use as an initiative sink or an early mover in a city battle is an indirect fire unit, a unit that has long-range missiles and that you're intending to spot for it. An LRM unit that doesn't have a spotter is not going to be a good initiative sink. Now, another kind of classic initiative sink is something like a Locust or another recon mech, something that's small, low battle value that you can protect with its speed and move it into a safe location, and that you can move early in the initiative order. So something like a Locust is going to be potentially a useful initiative sink in the city, although fast-moving ground-bound units like a Locust, for example, will have a significant disadvantage in the city because they'll need to make piloting checks if they run in order to avoid skidding on the pavement. So if you're going to use a fast unit as an initiative sink, you're either going to want something really fast that can walk and still initiative sink, or something that can jump in initiative sink. Another option that's very nice is VTOLs to use as spotters. If you park a VTOL at a very high altitude, a distance outside the city, you can usually keep it safe from any enemy fire, and it can be used to spot for long-range missiles and also to locate enemy units if you're playing by double blind, which in Mega Mech is one of the most fun ways to play in a city. And finally, a type of low-value unit where it doesn't usually matter that much when do you move them in the initiative order is infantry. And as we'll see, infantry can be a very powerful type of unit in the city. Now, if you've never played a city game, you have no idea how strong infantry can really be in the right situations. The great thing about infantry in the city in BattleTech, of course, is that they can easily enter buildings. And when they enter buildings, they receive cover from the buildings, because effectively your opponent has to attack the building, not the infantry, and then a percentage of the damage, depending on how hardened the building is, goes to the infantry. But regardless, infantry have a lot more staying power if they fight in the city. They can effectively move and fire from covered positions all the time, as long as they're inside buildings. Now, when infantry are inside buildings, they use their ground movement points to move side to side as well as up and down within the building, right? They can go higher and lower level within the buildings. So if you have like a building that is 6 levels high, you can get your infantry up to the top floors of that building from the bottom floor, but they'll only be able to move up in a given turn a number of levels equal to their ground movement points. So ground movement points are actually a really important stat for infantry if they're operating in the city. And this leads to some surprising choices being optimal when you enter the city. Actually, jump movement points for infantry are not as good in the city as they are out in the countryside, so to speak. Take this example, and here's my first recommendation of a good unit for fighting in the city: the Grey Death Standard Battle Armor. Now, normally you look at the Grey Death Standard Battle Armor and you think, well, it's not exactly terrible, but compared to regular battle armor, Inner Sphere battle armor, this Grey Death battle armor is kind of crappy, because instead of being able to jump 3, it has ground movement points 3, which is really not as good. It doesn't provide that evasion, and of course there's no downside to jumping for battle armor, because they don't take attacker movement modifiers from their own movement. So getting rid of those jump jets is really a bad thing under ordinary circumstances. But if you are trying to climb up levels inside a building, jump movement points won't help you with that, and a regular Inner Sphere suit will only be able to climb up 1 level per turn, whereas these Grey Death suits with their fast ground speed, they can climb up 3 levels in a turn, or they could, for example, enter a building using 1 movement point side to side and then climb up 2 levels. So they really have a lot of enhanced flexibility when they're operating inside a city. For the same reason, motorized infantry platoons, which have 3 movement points on the ground, are also really strongly advantaged in the city. I would recommend taking laser platoons, because even though their damage is quite a bit less than the rifle platoons, their range is significantly higher, double the range of the rifle platoons. The range of the rifle platoons is just the range of a small laser, and it's really not going to be long enough to be effective, even in the close range confines of city combat. Now, if you really want to kick some butt, and I mean really if you want to cheese things up, you can bring field gun infantry into the city. For a very small amount of battle value, for the regular field gun infantry platoon, you get 2 autocannon 10s as your main firepower, along with the ability of the infantry to move 3 movement points within buildings and enter buildings for protection. So these infantry could set up at the top of a very tall building, for example, in the top floor of a tall building, and just rain down autocannon fire on enemies. It's really easy also, because they cost so little battle value, to make these field gun infantry extremely skilled and therefore extremely accurate with those AC-10s. It's honestly too bad that these field gun infantry are so undercosted. Even if you're not playing in a city, field gun infantry are really undercosted for what you get. I would love to be able to play with these units and feel good about myself, but they're just too good a deal, they're too cheesy, and I usually feel guilty taking field gun infantry in most games. They're just a little bit, I mean, they're actually, I shouldn't say a little bit, they're a lot too good for their battle value. Okay, getting into some of those long-range indirect fire initiative sync units, a great option is always the heavy long-range missile carrier. This is available only in 3058, so before then, you're going to want to take a regular LRM carrier, but the heavy LRM carrier has a couple of big advantages. It has way better ammunition survivability. It's going to take longer to deplete those ammo stores. Of course, it does have an extra 4th LRM-20, so the firepower of this thing is pretty awesome. And it also has a turret, so it doesn't need to turn physically in order to move the firing arc of its long-range missiles. And with long-range missile carriers, especially if you're going to be using them for indirect fire, which you always should, you generally want to at least skill those up to Gunnery 3, and ideally Gunnery 2, because, of course, indirect fire, you have an extra +1 modifier, and usually there's extra modifiers from the spotter's movement and things like that, so it can be quite difficult to hit with indirect fire unless you have really skilled gunners. Fortunately, given the relatively low battle value of the heavy LRM carrier, It's not that hard to improve the skill. If you want something that has a little bit less firepower but has more resilience in terms of the armor to survive a hit or two, a good alternative, or an alternative for earlier in the BattleTech history before that heavy LRM carrier is available, is the Partisan heavy tank LRM variant. I've talked a bit about this before on other videos. It's certainly a winner. It's also a unit that has enough armor to be survivable enough to function even in field battles outside the city. So this is a very nice alternative option compared with that heavy LRM carrier. Now, tanks are generally a way better deal for indirect LRM fire support than battle mechs are, but if you're playing mechs only, then I would say the longbow OW2 is a pretty good choice as an alternative initiative sync if you want to use indirect LRM fire in a game. And I talked before about the possibility of using fast VTOLs as spotters and initiative syncs in the city. I'll just go through a couple of good options. One of them, of course, is the classic Ferret Light Scout VTOL, which is available in most eras. There's nothing special about this thing. It's just speed together with a tiny bit of armor. So you can use this to spot, especially for indirect LRM fire. If you're bringing one of those heavy LRM carriers, I would want to always have something like this Ferret Light Scout VTOL, assuming that you have the battle value and the room for it in your force. A lot of time in the city you're going to be using infantry, and so you might be able to do something kind of multi-role with your VTOL. Have it function as an infantry transport to get your infantry into the action early, and then after that move it out of the city and bring it up to a high height to use it as a spotter from then on. So one good choice then, if you're using foot platoons, would be the Martin Scout VTOL, which has enough troop capacity to carry a foot platoon, and in addition it has movement that's comparable to that Ferret. So consider this one potentially, this infantry variant of the Martin. But for most of the infantry that you're going to be thinking about using in the city, and especially for those battle armor and those motorized troops that I was talking about earlier, you're going to want a Karnov transport, which is the only real infantry transport VTOL that has the carrying capacity to carry those heavy battle armor units or motorized platoons. Fortunately, the Karnov also has excellent speed, and so it is very useful as a VTOL spotter. So the way I would use this thing is, pick the building that you want your platoon or your battle armor squad to be in, get it close to that or right up to that using the Karnov in the first couple of turns, drop off the infantry, and then just take the Karnov outside the city and move it to a high height so that it can see over all the buildings and use it as a spotter from then on for the rest of the battle. Okay, so we've covered initiative syncs. Now what about offensive units that you might want to use in the city? Your offense in the city is primarily going to be happening up close. So you're going to want brawlers, close range fighters, potentially ambushers actually. The city is the one kind of setting in which a cheap unit like a Hetzer assault gun with an AC-20 and not much armor is going to actually be really useful. Now you don't want to waste a lot of battle value on long-range weapons in the city, especially because the battle value system penalizes range quite a bit, perhaps more than it deserves. So focus on short-range weapons, weapons especially that have a 369 range bracket. That is the sweet spot for offensive power in the close quarters of the city. It's really just very unusual that you will have more than 6 hexes straight line of sight in the city in a way that your opponent can't easily break. I mean, a lot of the time you're going to have long streets in the city, but if you're firing down one of those long streets, it's very easy for your opponent to just get out of the way and get out of your line of sight down a side street, the way most city maps are designed. So really, longer range weapons are not that useful if they're direct fire weapons, and your short range weapons, your medium lasers, SRMs, and AC-20s are going to be your bread and butter offensive weapons. And this goes especially for the AC-20s because you're going to need piercing weapons, weapons that do a significant chunk of damage in one chunk. And the AC-20 is really the weapon that achieves that at the 369 range bracket. So bring yourself some AC-20s if you know you're going to be fighting in a city. Now, fighting in the city is happening at close quarters usually, and there's not a lot of obstructive terrain. You're not going to find a lot of woods to protect yourself with in the city. Sometimes you can get partial cover, but even partial cover, there's not a lot of height 1 buildings in most city maps. So even partial cover can be difficult to come by. So you're not going to have your opponents are not going to have a lot of difficulty hitting you. This means that your defense is going to have to come from your armor and your weight. So you're going to want to focus on heavily armored units. And you want to focus especially, in the case of your battle mech forces, on heavyweight mechs, because the close quarters of the city mean that your physical attacks are going to be more of a benefit than they usually are in a regular field battle. I mean, physical attacks are already great in BattleTech, especially kicks, but in the city they're even better because the amount of time you spend right up next to your opponent is just greater. So let's look at some specific examples. As many of you will already know, the city is really the setting where the Hunchback shines. And in particular, I want to draw your attention to the Hunchback 5S. This mech has jump movement points. Now, as I was talking about before, jump movement points are not what you want on infantry in the city, but you do really want jump movement points in the city on your battle mechs. Running, of course, causes skidding in the city, so you're going to want to avoid running as much as you can. That means the disadvantage of jump compared with alternative movement options is less. Also, a lot of the time you can, of course, jump over or onto buildings. Always be careful jumping onto a building, because if you're jumping onto a building that is too lightly structured to support your mech, or a building that your opponent could shoot at and shoot it out from under your mech, then you might be putting yourself at a disadvantage. But having the option to jump is always preferable in the city. In addition, this mech's primary weapon, the LB-20X, is extremely good in urban combat conditions. That weapon is going to allow you to do a huge amount of piercing damage if you want. You can also do a lot of crit-seeking damage, of course, with an LB-20X. And the medium pulse lasers are just perfect urban combat weapons to back it up, because they're very short-ranged, they're very accurate, solid amount of damage. This mech is an extremely good performer in the city, and the maximum armor just really helps as well. If you're looking for an assault mech to take in this city, there are a lot of good options. Actually, the basic 3025 Atlas works really well. But a mech that I really like in urban combat conditions is the original variant of the Sunder. This thing has an AC-20, so it's got that powerful short-range piercing weapon. And it just backs it up with an incredible arsenal of short-range missiles, lots of close-range firepower on this thing. It's really going to take apart enemy mechs in those kind of up-close conditions. This mech doesn't have jump jets, but aside from that, it's got really solid armor, and those 90-ton kicks are going to provide an excellent backup weapon in the city. If you want a medium mech that has both some speed and some offensive power in an urban setting, the Enforcer 36H is a really nice choice. An Ultra AC-20 provides just devastating piercing damage. 3 ER medium lasers to back it up is solid. You've got 5 jump movement points, so this thing can really get where it's going in an urban environment. And remember, the more your jump movement points, the taller of a building you can get on top of. So in addition to speed, there's this extra maneuverability advantage from that high of a jump movement point. Speaking of which, improved jump jets really shine in the city. So this 4K variant of the Ostrock, it's laid out with short-range weapons including snub-nosed PPCs, and it has 6 jump movement points from improved jump jets. The armor is not the world's greatest, but it's fine, and the mech does have a standard fusion engine for resilience. Its 60-ton mass and the lack of weapons in its arms mean that its physical attacks are going to be a real threat as well. A really devastating fighter in an urban setting at the heavyweight class is the Marauder 5M. This mech is packing an arsenal of pulse lasers, which gives it really superb close-range firepower. It has 4 points of jump movement, which is, of course, excellent. The armor, again, is fine, not the world's greatest, but not terrible. The only real big disadvantage of this mech is that it has only 1 ton of ammunition for its LB-10X. You probably want to give it cluster ammunition, but the solid shot on the LB-10X is really useful, as I've discussed in my LBX video, so that is a significant problem with this mech. The Demolisher heavy tank is a famous, iconic unit in BattleTech, and the city is really the only situation in which I would consider the Demolisher to be strong in competitive play. You're still actually paying quite a bit of battle value for what you get, but that double AC-20 firepower is really something. There is a disadvantage to using tanks as your up-close combatants in a city, which is they do get motive crits. The problem with that is that if an enemy unit gets immobilized, then you can usually do a good job of avoiding it in the city because it's easy to break line of sight. So don't count on your Demolisher destroying more than 1 or 2 enemy units, or really even doing its job against more than 1 or 2 enemy units, because if it gets motive critted, then it's going to just be stuck probably outside the fight for the rest of the game. For that reason, it's often best to focus on units in the city that have very low battle value cost if you want to take tanks. And for that reason, I would usually prefer taking the light SRM carrier over something like that Demolisher. It's just a little bit over half the battle value. It's got an extremely dangerous arsenal with 5 SRMs. It's got a turret, which is very nice to make those SRMs easy to bring to bear against your opponents. The armor also isn't terrible, actually, which is a plus. You know, there's at least 10 points on every location, so this thing is not likely to get one-shotted at all. It's a very nice close combat unit for the city. You can't expect it to survive an encounter with more than 1 enemy, but honestly that's also true for that Demolisher. Alright, my friends, I hope that this list of examples gives you an idea of the principles I had in mind when I was pointing out which units are the best in the city. I hope you're feeling ready to put together a force for some Cityfight, Citytech battles. And in a later video, I'll be talking quite a bit about city tactics. Actually, in terms of movement and firing, what do you want to do to control your units in the city? Now, my list of good city fighting units is certainly not exhaustive, so let me know what some ones are that you really enjoy bringing into city battles and that you've had good results with. So until next, have a good one. I'm going to be keeping on a reduced schedule for the rest of the summer, but I'm hoping that I'll be able to get out a video about every other week for you folks. I'm definitely going to try to maintain a steady pace, even if it's not as quick as the pace that I have during the regular season. See you again soon.